Everyone, Miss Rivera here. So I'm going to walk you through our wheel setup and kind of the different parts, the tools that you'll need, and some of the basic steps. So this is our wheel. The potter's wheel, as we know it now, is a modern invention, but in its basic form is actually very, very old. Before we had electricity, we would have what are called kick wheels, where this top part that spins now because of a motor would have been attached to a larger wheel at the bottom that we would kick with our foot and make the top spin. Fortunately, we have electricity, so we don't have to get that one-legged workout in. The various parts, we have our wheel head. This is where all of our throwing with our clay is actually going to happen. We have our splash pan, which helps catch some of the water and hopefully contain some of the mess. That water is going to travel down here and into this hole. I've got a bucket to catch the water as it drips into that hole. And I'm mindful as I'm kind of straddling the wheel here that my apron isn't in the bowl and my leg is kind of over the bowl. If you need something to kind of prop your leg up a little bit higher to make that happen, we can get that for you. Now, this thing runs on electricity, and the speed is controlled by a little pedal. I'm going to move the camera here. You can see it down here, this little pedal. Now, it's kind of like a gas pedal in the sense that it controls the speed, but it's different from the gas pedal in the sense that you don't have to continue to press it down. You kind of can set it and it will stay there, okay? So the basic steps here, as we get started, there is an on switch on the side here that is going to start our wheel for us, okay? We want to start by getting about a baseball-sized ball of clay. I have already wedged this clay, so I've kneaded it like dough to get it all consistent, get any air bubbles out. This is fairly soft clay, very plastic. I've also gone and pounded it between my hands, alternating hands, to get it into a rough ball. And then I'm going to go in if there's any big pockets and smooth those out now. I won't have to do it later if I make sure I get rid of them now. As far as the tools I have with me, I have a bucket of water and a sponge. I have a wire tool so that I can cut off anything that I create. And I have a needle tool. If you want to use some other tools like any of the wooden sculpting tools, those can be helpful, but you may not get to that point. That's definitely a more advanced thing to do. So I'm going to start by squeezing all of the water out of my sponge so it is barely damp, and I'm just going to wipe a little spot in the center. It's not wet. If it's wet, my clay is going to slide off. It's just damp. I'm getting rid of dust. I'm making sure that I've got a nice clean surface for this clay to adhere to right in the center of this clay, this wheel head. I'm going to take my ball of clay and I'm going to slam it down. Oh no, that isn't in the center. You can look at the little rings in here and see that it's not centered. So I can kind of wiggle it as close to the center as I can get it by my eyes. And then I can turn the wheel on as slowly as I can, and I'm going to just drag my finger along the very edge just to make sure it's attached, okay? The other thing that I can do while it's spinning slowly is kind of press and tap down and in, okay? The first step that we need to make sure happens here is called centering. Now, the goal of this, the reason we've got the wheel spinning, is we want to get the clay in the very, very center so that we can make a nice symmetrical piece. A few things about throwing: you always want to make sure your hands are wet, like very wet, not just damp, wet. But weirdly, I know this sounds weird, the cleaner you keep your hands, I personally think that it's easier to work. So you'll see me a lot take my hands when they start getting covered with clay, and I will scrape them on the side of my bucket and then go get more water, because the clay likes to pull clay off of this, whereas water will just glide over the surface. The less detailed you are, so the beginning of this stage, we can have our wheel head going faster, spinning faster. The more and more detailed and more fragile this guy gets, we want to slow it down and be more careful, okay? But the first step is called centering, and essentially, when we center our clay, this wheel head can spin and it looks like the clay is not even moving. It's a perfect circle or dome or whatever shape you're starting with. So if we look at this, and I'm going to try and make it go a little slower for the camera here because I can't really keep up, you can see how kind of lumpy and wiggly it is. If I put my hand over it, you can see that my hand is moving. We don't want it to seem like it's moving at all. So I'm going to get my hands real wet. I'm going to get the surface of my clay wet, and I'm actually going to get the wheel, excuse me, the wheel head a little bit wet too. And what that's going to do is make it so that my hands can glide over the clay a little bit easier, because my hands are going to sit right on the wheel head, okay? So for centering, notice my posture. I am right up against the wheel head. My legs are kind of straddling it. I want my nose, the tip of my nose, right over the wheel, right over the center of it. And then I want my elbows in or down against my thighs. I don't want my elbows up here because then the clay is going to be able to move me back and forth. We have to be stronger than the clay. So we lock our elbows in, put our hands down, and then it's harder for the clay to move us around, okay? So as we get going here, I'm going to keep my hands damp, keep them wet all the time, and I'm pushing with the heel of my hand, not with my fingers. So I'm not gripping with my fingers. I'm pushing into the center with the heel of my hand. If the clay starts to feel sticky, it's getting too dry.